Hello there. I'm Dina Newman. I'm in my local park in London. All around me, children are playing, running around, practicing tennis, skateboarding. And I'm here learning to roller skate because I also want to have fun, right? But I am a beginner and I'm struggling to keep control of my feet. One is rolling left, the other one is rolling right. Any minute, I might end up doing splits with my dignity and composure in tatters. Before I put my skates on, I had plans to skate down that hill. But now my feet have other ideas. I'm not in control anymore. It's frustrating, but it's also strangely exhilarating.
People fixing the world.
You're listening to People Fixing the World on the BBC World Service. We'll look at solutions to all kinds of problems. And today we're looking at radically new ways of running a business without managers. Yep, you heard it right. No more bosses. But what does my roller skating have to do with running a business? Well, if you don't have someone making decisions and setting you directions, don't you end up like me on my roller skates, all over the place with bits and pieces pulling in different directions? We'll answer those questions in a minute, but first, what's the problem with bosses?
I think one of the biggest challenges is the direct and indirect cost of bureaucracy. The management lab estimates that the excess cost of bureaucracy in the U.S. alone is $3 trillion a year. That's 1/7 of the entire U.S. economy, at least pre-COVID-19.
The Management Lab is a management consultancy in the US.
The costs show up in unnecessary permission steps up and down the chain of command. They show up in slow, ineffective decision-making. They show up in inappropriate application of force and coercion, and in myriad ways.
That's Doug Kirkpatrick, a man with a highly unusual career path, of which more later. These days, he's a management consultant, arguing against management hierarchies.
And the other challenge is that most workers are disengaged. So if you look at virtually any engagement survey or disengagement survey, you find that 2/3 to 3/4 of workers are disengaged. They're checked out. They're just putting in their time. 20% of American workers, according to Gallup, are actively disengaged. So they're actively undermining their own workplaces. Gallup estimates those costs are in the range of $500 billion a year.
Disengaged and unhappy workers usually complain that they cannot challenge decisions imposed from above, while ideas from below rarely make it to the top. Access to information is limited on the need-to-know basis. Workers also resent management costs. And the more managers you have, the more managers you need to manage the managers. So, let's see what happens if we remove all bosses. Visiting patients in their homes is Madelon van Tilburg, a community nurse in the Netherlands. She loves her job, which for her means more than just giving injections or dressing a wound.
When we have a client with diabetes, I can just go in and just give the insulin and go out. But if I never talk about her diet, give more instructions or see what's happening with her, then I keep on going and just delivering tasks. And when I move towards having this conversation, then I think you move towards taking care of clients. For me, it was the reason to work in home healthcare.
Madelon used to work for a company run by managers who didn't share her view on care and insisted on her just delivering tasks. She felt that the managers were more interested in saving money than looking after patients.
It was all about checking and controlling. I didn't have the freedom to really be the nurse I wanted to be. When I was facing a client situation that asks a little bit more of my time, I was not allowed to spend, for example, 10 minutes longer. A lot of restrictions set by the organization.
In order to keep costs down, Madelon's time with her patients was limited, allowing only for the basic tasks. The system run by managers, not nurses, allowed zero flexibility. But now she works at Bertok, a Dutch nursing organization, and this is where this week's solution comes in. Bertok simply doesn't have these bosses with their usual roles.
My assumption is that most of this work doesn't need to be done.
Jos de Blok set up the company in 2006 with 4 colleagues. And the most important thing is that the nurses manage themselves.
If you start thinking about what's needed for patients, and as a nurse, I am a nurse, then your focus is how can you support nurses in the best possible way, and how can you organize everything around it. So you're taking care for patients, you are scheduling your own activities, and the things you do as a team, you discuss with your team members. So the administration, registration takes just very little time of the nurses.
This means that Madelon and her highly qualified colleagues are in charge of the client's assessment. They draft the care plan and schedule visits. Their employer trusts them to do that. A self-organized team of 12 nurses looks after 50 to 60 clients, many of whom are seriously or terminally ill. At the beginning, a nurse spends longer with her client, looking at their living conditions, informal support networks, and other factors which may help them.
And that's what I like so much about buurtzorg, that we have this holistic view and you can spend time with your client, of course, within reason. But if you really think it's so important for this day to spend 10 minutes longer here because of this and this and this, you are allowed to do this.
But that doesn't mean Madelon's work got any easier.
All team members work in the community, so they are all nurses or nurse assistants. So that's part of our work. And the other part is more the management. So we have to find our own office, we have to recruit new team members. So that's also part of our work.
And do you get paid for it? Do you get any extra?
Yeah, we get a little bit extra, but the benefits you gain while organizing it ourselves is that we try to support each other. We are trusted. That's, I think, the difference. Instead of checking and controlling, you move towards trust.
The nurses love this setup, and for several years Bertok was voted the best employer in the Netherlands. It's so popular that it currently employs half of all community nurses in the country. But doesn't all this hiring, scheduling, drafting care plans, just for a little bit extra, create more work and more stress?
What I see in a lot of organizations, there's a lot of stress. Because when you have a hierarchical organization, people tell you what to do. And if you tell yourself what to do, and if you have control on what you're doing yourself every day, then of course you can have a conflict with yourself, but that's quite easy to solve.
As for pay, the nurses get the rate agreed with the union, plus a little bit extra that Madelon was talking about. Jos de Blok is still the leader of the company with a vision, but he is not the manager. It's a different role. He is not running day-to-day operations. He used to get the same salary as the nurses, but his board recommended a pay rise. He now gets twice the salary of a nurse. So how does Bertok fare as a business? It's now got 15,000 staff. A study by KPMG has showed that it ranked amongst the best in the country for patient satisfaction, although it provides less hours of care per patient than the industry average. It spends more money on nurses but saves on management costs, and so Bertok's total costs are about the same as the industry average. So, self-management is working for Bertok, but it's a non-profit organization. But now imagine you're a financial controller in a new venture aiming to make a profit in a highly competitive and cost-cutting industry. Would you ever agree to hand over control to your employees? Most wouldn't. But that's the decision Doug Kirkpatrick took 30 years ago as he was embarking on a new project.
We had about 24 people, and we were working out of a tiny little farmhouse in Northern California, where our task was to construct and operate a state-of-the-art food processing facility.
So this is our perfect tomato. We have many types of fire roasted tomatoes, so what we've tried to capture on our perfect tomato line is we're adding the filled sweetness back in. So we're concentrating.
Morningstar is a tomato processing business. This promotional video shows them making lots of tomato-based products. They harvest tomatoes, can them, and turn them into paste, puree, and sauces. Now back to the first days of the company.
And one day in March of 1990, our founder came into the farmhouse and said that he'd like to have a meeting of colleagues.
The founder and owner of the company was Chris Rufer.
And we met with him at night, and we sat around in a circle on steel folding chairs facing each other. And Chris handed out a document called the Morningstar Team Principles. The first principle was that human beings should not use force or coercion against other human beings. And the second principle was that people should keep the commitments they make to each other. And so we adopted them as pretty much the entire governance of the enterprise.
Hang on a minute. Any company that would consider itself hierarchical with layers and layers of management would insist that they are bound by exactly the same principles. They don't use force. I don't understand how these two principles lead you to no management.
Well, it's an interesting question, Dina, because if you fire someone unilaterally, you're using force. So I dare say that most organizations are predicated on the use of force. And it's specifically managerial force that is exercised against subordinates in a hierarchy. And at Morningstar, this is radical because no one has the unilateral authority to walk up to another person and terminate their employment.
No one has that authority because, like in Bertok, there is no boss. Hiring, firing, and pay decisions are made by your peers. There are no titles and no promotions. Everyone can spend the company's money, and everyone is responsible for buying the tools they need for their job, so no need for a purchasing department. Hang on, but where did it leave Doug as a financial controller? Surely he, at least, had to be able to tell the others what they could and couldn't spend.
Certainly after we had adopted self-management, from that moment on, we were self-managers. We weren't managers of others. It means you literally cannot tell another person what to do. Everything is based on request and response. And that's pretty much it.
Would it be true to say that a self-managed company like yours empowers people who are already very good and it leaves behind those who are not so good?
Yeah, I'm not sure I accept the phrase left behind. There are some people who take full advantage of this environment. Others take less advantage, but they do benefit because their voice is respected. When they do propose something, it must be listened to. They are not subject to force and coercion, and if they don't act according to their commitments, they can be held accountable by anyone.
They can be held accountable because their commitments are negotiated with other colleagues. The progress is reviewed every year by a committee of their peers. Everyone gets an annual pay rise reflecting the increase in the cost of living. They might also get a pay increase if they successfully present a business case for it. To progress, you have to find new opportunities to serve the business better and sell the idea to your colleagues. In this internally competitive system, your track record matters. And if you take on new commitments, you have to keep them. But isn't it obvious?
Many people, if not most, and many organizations, if not most, are sloppy about the way they make and keep commitments. And to the degree we can achieve impeccability and clarity of commitment making and commitment keeping, we can astronomically drive organizational performance.
Wow, that's a big claim. But then today, Morningstar is the largest tomato processor in the world, supplying over 40% of the US market with tomato paste and chopped tomatoes. It employs approximately 400 year-round colleagues, mostly on the factory floor, and over 2,000 seasonal workers, all self-managed. Doug left Morningstar in 2003, and since then he has set up his own consultancy. He enjoyed this way of working, but admits it can be tricky to find people for roles that would traditionally be considered top management jobs.
Many of them have grown up in ecosystems where they've had perks and power and command authority and titles. And so when they come to Morningstar, they don't have any of those things. And then when they come on board, they find it's just too difficult to adjust. They'd just rather be able to tell people what to do.
Let's pause for a moment to clarify a few things here. Self-management doesn't mean that there is no coordination, structures or procedures. On the contrary, clear procedures, including for resolution of internal disputes, are key. For coordination, it is vital that everyone has access to all business information. There are all sorts of variations of self-management used around the world in Brazil, Argentina, Australia, China, India, and many other countries. Both Bertok and Morningstar were self-managed from the very start. But if you want to adapt a traditionally managed company, how do you go bossless? Enter Holacracy and its founder, Brian Robertson.
It's the first completely packaged system. It gives you an out-of-the-box set of tools, of processes, a framework for adopting self-management. It can be used in any sector, any industry, any type of company.
So here is the promise. No matter what size, type of company or industry, Holacracy is your chance to introduce self-management. Just get on your skates and go. But my first encounter with the system was bewildering. I had asked for an interview with Brian Robertson. The reply I got was so surprising, I recorded myself as I was trying to get my head around it. Ooh, exciting. I just got an email from someone from... I don't actually know who I got the email from. His name is Yoad, but I don't know anything else about him. There is a little link saying, see my roles. And, oh my God, there's about 30 roles. One of the roles is circle scheduler, back office operations. Who is this guy? That's an interesting role. Fulfillment falcon. Wow. I rather fancy myself as a fulfillment falcon on a good day. Right. Yoad was also effectively the press officer. But why does he need more roles? That's mad. I have just one job, a journalist. There's no chance I could do 29 more jobs.
Well, so it doesn't actually make anyone have any more work. From a Holacracy lens, you definitely have more than one role, right? You maybe have an interviewer role, but you've also got a writer role or something. You've got an editor role, perhaps. You've got a scheduler role to schedule these interviews, whatever. All it's doing is taking the overall job description we have and saying, let's break this down more and let's get more clear. What are the different functions and why are you doing them? What are the purposes of each of these functions? It frees people to kind of build, more like consciously construct their job instead of just getting stuck in one place with one giant job description.
According to Holacracy, one giant job description gets you attached to your position and boosts your ego. Say you're a boss. Your job is now split into 10 roles which are distributed among the team and they manage themselves. So how do we make sure colleagues don't end up pulling in different directions, like my roller skates? Well, to avoid the same in the company, Holacracy recommends a lot of soul-searching and self-development for colleagues to discover their purpose and make sure it fits with the company's purpose. Then everyone should be on the same page. Let's take Julia Cullen, a management consultant based in Vienna. 7 years ago, she introduced Holacracy in her company.
But as you know, I'm not so enthusiastic about it. It sounds better than it is. That's the whole thing.
It turned out their small business had an endless number of roles.
So there was a lot of time in just filling in what is the roles, what are the responsibilities, who is doing what role can decide on what. And suddenly the question who is watering the flowers became a thing. So we had to think about all these things.
Julia was leading the change, had numerous roles, and she observed what happened with all those egos once their jobs were broken up and action points were awarded for specific tasks.
There is, of course, always room for ego. Of course, you try to suppress it, but it's shining through in the way that you just say, what were your main tasks you did this week? There were some partners who were like having 10 points, like, I was contacted by this, I did this, and I did that. And there were some other employees who told me they don't even want to go to these meetings because they feel like it's a full show of action points. So the structure itself cannot take out the ego.
Yeah, but why couldn't these employees say openly what they thought?
In Holacracy, we had the same things that people didn't dare to speak up because they were still employees and the owners were still owners. With or without Holacracy, you couldn't do away with that.
Julia's experience is similar to that of other companies, which had eliminated management on paper, but retained a hidden layer of management power, according to some employees. But Brian says things go wrong when the system is not practiced properly.
A lot of companies don't get the right coaching or support. Some of them do and still don't make it because it's a really difficult shift. People fall back to managers acting like little dictators of their little kingdom. That's the risk, and it's hard. This is a multi-year transition, and that's if you do it well, right? It's a big change.
After a year of struggle, Julia left the company, partly because she was disappointed with the system. But she does credit Brian Robertson with making people think about how to run a business differently. And she thinks the way forward for a traditional company is not to dismantle its management hierarchy, but to allow small self-managed teams to operate under its umbrella.
I think the future of organizations is going into networks, into more platform organizations where you have maybe a shared brand, a shared purpose, some shared rules. And what you can see in all these models, they split up the business into small groups of around 10 people. So you have the flexibility of small units. You combine it with a big brand. They are part of a bigger system, of a brand, of a platform where they can make business with each other, where they can support each other, and where they can really use the strength against a single small company on the market.
Here you go. One vision out of many, but one that manages to combine the best of the hierarchy with the advantages of self-management. That's all from People Fixing the World this week. Next week, William Kramer will be here. What have you been busy with, William?
Oh, well, Dina, I have been talking to 4 children from up and down the UK who have all invented things or discovered things in science. These are all entrants into something called the Big Bang competition. And some of their innovations are really amazing, actually. I can't wait to share them.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to this. See you next week. Bye-bye.